My life operated on a simple principle. If it could be fixed with wood, screws, or spackle, I could handle it. Anything else, emotions, long-term plans, the lingering ghost of a failed marriage, was best left in the toolbox, preferably under a layer of sawdust and forgotten bits of hardware. At 35, I had achieved a level of emotional equilibrium that most people would call stagnant. I called it peace. My ex-wife, Sarah, had called it boring. Semantics, really. I was a renovator. I took broken things and made them whole again. I found a deep, satisfying quiet in the process. The scream of a miter saw cutting through a 2x4, the rhythmic scrape of a putty knife, the final, satisfying click of a cabinet door aligning perfectly. These were the sounds of my world, a predictable and orderly symphony that drowned out the Messier notes of human connection. After Sarah left, citing my unwavering, soul-crushing predictability, I had leaned into it. I had made it my brand. Leo Maxwell, quietly competent, dependably dull. The divorce had been amicable, which is a sterile, polite word for soul-crushingly indifferent. We didn't fight over the house. I had built half of it, so I bought her out. We didn't fight over friends. They had already chosen sides long before the papers were signed. We just stopped, like a clock winding down. She wanted fireworks and grand gestures. I offered her a perfectly hung picture frame. It turned out you couldn't build a life on that. So I settled, not in a sad way, or so I told myself. I settled like dust, finding a comfortable place on a quiet surface and deciding not to be disturbed. My days were a loop. Wake up, drink coffee while reviewing blueprints, go to the job site, work until my muscles hummed with exhaustion, come home, microwave something that vaguely resembled a meal, watch an hour of television about other people building things, and sleep. It was a clean, simple existence. A life plain smooth, with no splinters. The call came on a Tuesday. It was from a property management company I'd worked with before. A new tenant in one of their high-end downtown lofts needed a custom built-in shelving unit and some minor cosmetic work. It was a rush job. The tenant was particular, they said, which was corporate speak for a pain in the neck, but the pay was good, and it would fill a gap in my schedule. I said yes without asking for details. A job was a job. A wall was a wall. I showed up the next morning, my truck loaded with tools and the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The building was one of those converted warehouses, all exposed brick and massive, unblinking windows that stared out at the city. It screamed new money and artistic pretensions. I rode the freight elevator up, my work boots echoing on the diamond plate steel, feeling like a blue-collar interloper in a world of abstract art and $5 coffee. I found a unit, 7B, and knocked. The door was a heavy slab of industrial steel, probably weighing more than my entire collection of power tools. I waited. The silence from within was absolute. I knocked again, louder this time. Finally, I heard the clack of a deadbolt, a sound that seemed too analog for a place like this. The door swung open, and the world tilted on its axis. It wasn't the loft, with its soaring ceilings and a view that probably cost more than my truck. It was the woman standing in the doorway. She was wearing an old, paint-splattered college sweatshirt, gray sweatpants, and a look of frazzled concentration. Her hair, a shade of dark honey I remembered from 1,000 sun-drenched afternoons, was piled into a messy knot on top of her head. A stray curl had escaped and was clinging to her cheek. My carefully constructed world of right angles and level surfaces shattered into a million pieces. Chloe, her eyes, the color of moss after a rainstorm, widened. The fatigue fell away, replaced by a shock that mirrored my own. She took a half step back, one hand coming up to touch the doorframe, as if for support. "Leo," she breathed. Her voice was the same. A little lower, maybe, but still with that same musical quality that I used to think could calm storms. "Leo Maxwell, what in the world are you doing here?" I held up my clipboard, a ridiculously flimsy shield against a decade of unspoken history. I'm the renovator." Chloe stared at me, then at the clipboard, then back at me. A slow smile spread across her face, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone discovering a forgotten, potentially dangerous artifact in their attic. "Of course you are," she said, a hint of laughter in her voice. "Of course, you're the guy who comes to fix things. Some things never change." I felt a flush creep up my neck. My entire life, my entire post-Sarah identity, was built on being the guy who fixes things. It was my armor. But hearing it from her, it sounded less like a compliment and more like a diagnosis. "A chronic condition. Can I come in?" I asked, my voice sounding rougher than I intended. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, a pause so small anyone else would have missed it. But I knew her. I knew the way her mind worked, the way she calculated risks and weighed options in the space between heartbeats. In that pause, I saw a ghost of the girl I once knew, the one who was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. "Yeah," she said, stepping back and gesturing into the vast, empty space. "Come on in. Welcome to the chaos." I stepped over the threshold, and it felt less like entering an apartment and more like stepping back in time. The air was thick with the smell of new paint and cardboard boxes, but underneath it all, I could have sworn I smelled her perfume. The one she used to wear in college. Something with vanilla and a hint of something I could never name, something that smelled like trouble and late nights and promises you knew you couldn't keep. The loft was a beautiful disaster. Boxes were stacked in precarious towers. Furniture was draped in white sheets, looking like a graveyard of domestic ambitions. And in the middle of it all, Chloe stood, a smudge of white paint on her nose, looking just as lost and beautiful as she had the day I last saw her, standing on a train platform with a world of distance opening between us. "So," she said, folding her arms across her chest, a defensive posture I knew well. "You're a renovator now." "It's what I do," I said, my gaze sweeping the room, automatically assessing the job. The wall she wanted the shelving on was load-bearing. The electrical outlets were poorly placed. The baseboards were scuffed. "I fix things, right?" She watched me, her head tilted. Her eyes were doing that thing they used to do, that laser-focused analysis that made me feel like she was reading the source code of my soul. "You were always good at that, building things, making them perfect." There was an unspoken but hanging in the air between us. "But you were never good at the messy stuff, the human stuff." "It's a living," I said, falling back on the comfortable, simple language of my trade. I needed to get back on solid ground. I needed a blueprint, a set of measurements, a task. "I need a wall of bookshelves," she said, her voice shifting, becoming more businesslike. She was putting up her own walls, floor to ceiling. "Over there," she pointed to the far wall. "Something sturdy. I have a lot of books." I walked over to the wall, running my hand over the cool plaster. It was a good wall. Solid. Dependable. I could work with this. "I can do that," I said. "I'll need to take some measurements. Draw up a design. We can talk materials. Maple, oak, cherry, painted or stained." I was rambling. I was hiding in the details, in the technical jargon that had become my second language. I could feel her watching me, her silence more potent than any words. "Leo," she said, and my name on her lips was a physical thing. It stopped me cold. I turned to face her. She was closer than I thought. The light from the massive window caught the gold flecks in her green eyes. "It's good to see you," she said, and for the first time since I'd knocked on her door, her smile was genuine. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was real, and it was the most dangerous thing I'd seen in a decade. "You too, Chloe," I managed to say, the words feeling inadequate. Seeing her wasn't just good, it was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was like finding a live wire I thought had been disconnected years ago, still humming with a lethal, irresistible current. I spent the next hour taking measurements, my tape measure snapping open and shut with a metallic precision that felt like a counter-rhythm to the frantic beating of my own heart. I tried to focus on the numbers, on the angles, on the sheer, unemotional physics of the job. But my mind was a traitor. It kept wandering back to the girl who used to steal my textbooks and write notes in the margins, to the woman who now stood in the middle of this cavernous room, looking both powerful and profoundly alone. She made coffee, a peace offering of sorts, and we sat on a dusty drop cloth, our mugs warming our hands. The silence between us was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of the ghosts of 1,000 conversations we'd never had. "So, what happened to architecture?" she asked, her voice soft. I had gone to school for architecture. It was our shared dream. We were going to be a power couple, designing and building a better world, one beautifully designed, structurally sound building at a time. "Life," I said with a shrug that I hoped looked casual. "I got married, bought a house. A mortgage has a way of making you more practical. Renovating paid the bills better than drafting theoretical museums." I didn't mention the part where Sarah had hated the long hours of a junior architect. The part where she called my passion a hobby and pushed me toward the more immediate, tangible income of contracting. "You got married," Chloe stated. It wasn't a question. It was a fact she was processing, another piece of the puzzle of the man I had become. "Divorced now," I added quickly, as if that somehow made it better. As if that erased the fact that I had chosen a different life, a different woman. "Oh," she looked down at her coffee mug, tracing the rim with her thumb. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be," I said a little too harshly. It was for the best. We were incompatible, a sterile, bloodless word for a slow, painful decay. "Incompatible," she repeated, tasting the word. "You, the most compatible person I've ever known? The guy who could get along with a brick wall." She gave me a small, sad smile. She must have been something special. I didn't know what to say to that. Sarah wasn't special. She was just next. She was the person who had been there when Chloe wasn't. She was the practical choice, the safe harbor after the storm of losing Chloe. And I had mistaken safety for happiness. "What about you?" I asked, desperate to shift the focus. "Last I heard, you were heading to Chicago for grad school." "I went," she said. "Got the degree. Got a job at a big, soulless firm. Designed a lot of glass boxes for a lot of rich people who cared more about the square footage than the soul of the space. I burned out. So you moved back." "So I quit," she corrected me gently. "And then I moved back. I'm starting my own thing. A small, independent design studio. One that focuses on people, not just buildings. This place is my office, my home, my grand, terrifying experiment." She gestured around the empty loft. "Hence the need for a good man with a saw." Her eyes met mine, and there was a challenge in them. A spark of the old Chloe, the one who dared the world to tell her she couldn't do something, just so she could have the pleasure of proving it wrong. It was in that moment, sitting on a dusty floor in a half-empty room, that I felt the first real crack in the placid surface of my carefully constructed life. It was a hairline fracture, barely visible, but I knew, with the certainty of a man who understands structural integrity, that it was the beginning of a much bigger break. And the most terrifying part? I wanted to see what would happen when it all came crashing down. The first few days on the job were a study in professional distance. I arrived early, I worked late, and I communicated with Chloe primarily through sketches and material samples. I was Leo, the renovator, a man of purpose and precision. The smell of sawdust was my cologne. The wine of the table saw was our only conversation. It was a lie, of course. A carefully constructed facade to hide the fact that every time she walked into the room, my heart did a clumsy two-step in my chest. I was acutely aware of her every movement. The way she'd bring me a glass of water, her fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second too long. The way she'd stand in the doorway, watching me work, her expression unreadable. I learned the rhythms of her new life. She worked from a makeshift desk in the corner, surrounded by towering stacks of books on urban planning and sustainable design. She took calls in a low, confident voice, her words painting pictures of community gardens and shared public spaces. She was brilliant, more brilliant than I remembered. She wasn't just designing buildings. She was trying to build a better world. And I was just building her a bookshelf. This self-deprecating thought hit me one afternoon as I was fitting the first of the vertical supports. Here she was talking about changing the social fabric of the city, and I was obsessing over a 1/16 of an inch gap. "It looks good," she said from behind me. I hadn't heard her approach. I jumped, my hand slipping on the level. It clattered to the floor. "You startled me." She smiled, a genuine, easy smile that made the room feel warmer. My fault. I should know better than to sneak up on a man with a nail gun. She gestured to the nascent structure. It's perfect. It's exactly what I pictured. It's just the frame, I said, my default modesty kicking in. Still a lot of work to do. No, it's more than that. She stepped closer, running her hand over the smooth, pale wood of the maple I'd selected. You have this way of seeing the finished thing before it's even there. You see the potential. You always have. There was again that unnerving perception. Sarah had seen my work as a means to an end, a paycheck, a finished project. Chloe was looking at the wood, at the frame, and seeing the process, the thought, the intention behind it. She was seeing me. It was unnerving. It was intoxicating. It's just about having a clear plan, I mumbled, turning back to my work, needing the safety of the task. Is that how you operate, Leo? She asked, her voice soft but persistent. A clear plan for everything. I thought of my life. The neat, orderly progression from job to job. The empty, quiet evenings. The future stretching out before me, as predictable and unadorned as a freshly painted wall. It's easier that way, I said. Fewer surprises. But surprises are where the good stuff is, she countered. The unexpected discovery. The happy accident. I thought about the happy accident that had led me to her door. I thought about the surprise of seeing her again, a jolt to the system that had left me feeling more alive than I had in years. I didn't have an answer for that. The social test, as I would later come to call it, arrived on a Thursday evening in the form of a man named Julian. I was packing up my tools, the day's work done. The bookshelf was starting to look like a bookshelf. Chloe and I had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, a delicate dance of shared space and quiet understanding. We were standing by the nearly completed unit, discussing the finish. I think a clear coat, she was saying. I want to see the grain. It's too beautiful to cover up. I agree, I said, looking at the wood but thinking about her. That's when the door buzzed. Chloe's brow furrowed. I'm not expecting anyone. She went to the intercom, her voice cautious. Hello. A man's voice, smooth and confident, crackled through the speaker. It's me, darling. Buzz me up. I brought dinner. Chloe's shoulders tensed. She glanced over at me, a flicker of something, annoyance, embarrassment, in her eyes. She pressed the button. Fine. Come up. She turned to me, her expression apologetic. Hey, friend. A friend who called her darling right. A few minutes later, the heavy steel door swung open, and Julian breezed in as if he owned the place. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my miter's saw, and he carried 2 bags from a restaurant I knew I couldn't afford. He had the kind of polished, effortless confidence that comes from a lifetime of having doors open for you. He kissed Chloe on the cheek, a possessive, proprietary gesture that made my hands curl in a fist at my sides. Then his eyes landed on me, standing there in my dusty work clothes, a living, breathing piece of the help. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on the sawdust clinging to my jeans. A small, condescending smile played on his lips. Oh, he said, his voice dripping with faux surprise. You've still got the worker here. Isn't it a little late for that? I felt the familiar heat of anger rise in my chest, but I tamped it down. I had dealt with men like Julian in my whole life. Men who saw my profession as a quaint hobby, my skills as something to be rented by the hour and dismissed. Before I could respond, Chloe stepped forward, her voice sharp. Julian, this is Leo. He's the contractor. Contractor, Julian repeated, drawing the word out as if it were something foreign and slightly unpleasant. Right. Well, Leo the contractor, as you can see, we're about to have dinner. So if you could just wrap it up, he made a shooing motion with his hand. I looked at Chloe. Her jaw was tight, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. She was about to go to bat for me, to start a fight with this peacock in a 3-piece suit. And I realized in that instant that I didn't want her to. I didn't need her to defend me. This was my turf. I wiped my hands on a rag, my movements slow and deliberate. I met Julian's gaze, my expression calm, neutral. Actually, I was just finishing up for the day, I said, my voice even. Just needed to confirm the final finishing details with the client. I turned my back on him, pointedly excluding him from the conversation and addressed Chloe directly. So, we're decided on the clear satin polyurethane. It'll take 3 coats with light sanding in between. I can start the first coat tomorrow morning. Should be fully cured and ready for books by Monday. I was speaking my language. The language of process, of competence, of tangible results. It was a world Julian knew nothing about. He scoffed behind me. Fascinating. The thrilling world of paint drying. I ignored him. I'll be here at 8 sharp, I said to Chloe. Unless that's too early. No, 8 is perfect, she said, her eyes shining with something I couldn't quite decipher. It looked like respect. Great, I picked up my toolbox. It was heavy, solid, real. I walked towards the door, my steps measured. As I passed Julian, I paused. He was standing there, holding his fancy takeout bags, looking momentarily wrong-footed. He was a guest in this conversation, an interruption, and he knew it. Have a good night, I said, the words polite, but carrying the unmistakable weight of dismissal. I had just been shooed out of the room, but somehow I was the one ending the encounter on my terms. I let myself out, the heavy door closing behind me with a satisfying thud. I didn't know it at the time, but I had just passed the test. As I rode the elevator down, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, familiar ache. Julian. So that was her life now. Men in expensive suits who called her darling and treated the people who worked with their hands like furniture. It shouldn't have bothered me. It was none of my business. I was the contractor. But it did bother me. It bothered me a lot. Because I remembered a girl who hated pretension, a girl who could spot a phony from a mile away. What had happened to that girl? Or, a more terrifying thought, was I the one who had changed, and she had simply moved on to a world where men like Julian were the norm? The next morning, I arrived at 7:45. I was a man on a mission to apply 3 coats of polyurethane with a level of precision that would make a brain surgeon weep. I was going to focus on the work. I was not going to think about Chloe or her arrogant friend. When she opened the door, she was already dressed, holding a cup of coffee that she immediately offered to me. I made you one, she said. Black, 2 sugars. If I remember correctly, I was floored. She remembered. After 12 years, a marriage, a divorce, a whole other life, she remembered how I took my coffee. It was a small thing, a tiny detail, but it felt like a seismic event. You remembered, I said, my voice thick. She smiled a small, shy smile. I have a good memory for the important things. We stood there in the morning light, the unspoken things from the night before hanging in the air between us. About last night, she began. Julian is complicated. You don't have to explain, I said, and I meant it. No, she took a deep breath. He's a partner at a firm my studio is trying to land a major contract with. It's a professional relationship. It doesn't seem to think so, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. She winced. I know. He's been persistent. He doesn't take no for an answer. You should get a louder bullhorn, I said, attempting a joke. She didn't laugh. She just looked at me, her gaze intense. Thank you, she said. For what? I didn't do anything. That's just it, she said, her voice full of a quiet awe that I didn't understand. You did nothing. He was baiting you. He was trying to get a rise out of you, to make you look small. And you just didn't play. You stayed in your own frame. You were completely, calmly you. She took a step closer, her eyes searching mine. My ex-husband would have gotten into a shouting match. My father would have tried to one-up him with a story about his golf handicap. Most men I know would have engaged on his level. She paused, and her next words hit me with the force of a physical blow. You let him think he was winning while you had already finished the race. You always did that. Idée pour win. The moment of being seen. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was quieter, more profound. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock I had forgotten existed. Sarah had called my calmness passivity. She called my quiet competence boring. She had seen my refusal to engage in petty dominance games as a weakness. Chloe saw it as strength. She saw me, the real me, the one I kept hidden under layers of sawdust and self-deprecation. I didn't know what to say. The carefully constructed walls of my peaceful, stagnant life were crumbling and the light pouring in was blinding. I should get started on that first coat, I stammered, turning away, needing the familiar comfort of task. As I knelt down and opened the can of polyurethane, the sharp, chemical smell filling the air, I felt her hand on my shoulder. It was a light touch, but it anchored me. "Leo," she said softly, "I'm really glad you're here." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it. For the first time in a very long time, I was glad to be here, too. Not just as a contractor, but as me, Leo Maxwell, the man who was, apparently, exactly where he was supposed to be. The arrival of the antagonist, round 2, was perfectly timed for maximum dramatic impact. Julian, it seemed, had a flair for it. I had just finished applying the third and final coat of finish on the bookshelf. It was a thing of beauty, if I did say so myself. The maple grain glowed under the satin finish, warm and inviting. It was more than a piece of furniture. It was a testament to patience, a monument to quiet craftsmanship. Chloe was ecstatic. She kept running her hand over the smooth surface, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on her face. "Leo, it's incredible," she breathed. "It's better than I ever imagined." We were celebrating with a pizza, her treat, sitting on the floor, using cardboard boxes as a table. It felt easy, comfortable. We talked about old college professors, about terrible summer jobs, about the ridiculous dreams we'd had when we were 20. We were carefully navigating the minefield of our shared past, sticking to the safe, funny memories. The future, and the 12 years of blank space between then and now, remained an untouched, formidable mountain range between us. We were laughing about the time I'd accidentally superglued my fingers to a model of a cantilevered bridge when the door buzzed, sharp and insistent. Chloe's laughter died in her throat. The easy warmth in the room evaporated. She didn't even have to check the intercom. We both knew who it was. "Just don't answer," I said, my voice low. "He knows I'm here," she said, her face grim. "His car is probably parked right out front. He'll just keep buzzing. Or worse, he'll sweet-talk the doorman." She got up, her movements stiff, and walked to the intercom. "What do you want, Julian?" "Darling." His voice oozed through the speaker, syrupy and condescending. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by and see how your little project is coming along. And to take you to the gallery opening I told you about. The one you need to be at. The unspoken threat hung in the air. The one that's important for your career. The one I can make or break for you." Chloe's back was ramrod straight. "I'm Busse Julian. Don't be silly. You're never too busy for networking. Buzz me up." It wasn't a request. She let out a long, frustrated sigh and pressed the button. She turned to me, her eyes dark with apology. "I'm so sorry, Leo. It's not your fault he's a jackass," I said, trying to lighten the mood. But the pizza suddenly tasted like cardboard in my mouth. Julian strode in, this time dressed in a black turtleneck and tailored trousers, looking like he was about to give a TED Talk on the importance of being an insufferable prick. He completely ignored me, his eyes fixed on Chloe. "What are you wearing?" he asked, his nose wrinkled in distaste. Chloe was still in her comfortable work-from-home clothes, a soft-looking sweater and jeans. "I'm wearing my clothes, Julian," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Well, you can't wear that to the Davos Gallery," he said. "Go change. We're late." He clapped his hands together as if to spur her into action. Then his eyes landed on the magnificent, newly finished bookshelf. He walked over to it, a critical sneer on his face. He ran a finger over the surface, a gesture that was meant to look appreciative but was really a search for imperfections. He found none. "Well, it's big," he said, his tone dismissive. "A bit rustic for this space, don't you think?" I was picturing something more minimalist. Italian steel, perhaps. Something with clean lines. He was belittling my work. He was belittling her choice. He was trying to piss on the one thing in this room that was wholly and completely ours, this small, shared victory of a bookshelf. I felt that familiar, hot anger coiling in my stomach. But I remembered what Chloe had said. "You don't play the game." I stayed quiet, watching. This was her fight, and she was more than ready for it. Chloe took a slow, deliberate step forward, placing herself between Julian and the bookshelf. She was a foot shorter than him, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over him. "No," she said. It was a single word, spoken without heat, but it carried the force of a slammed door. Julian looked taken aback. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no, I'm not going to the gallery with you," she said, her voice crystal clear. "No, I'm not going to change my clothes. And no, you do not get to criticize the single most beautiful thing in this apartment." She turned and looked at the bookshelf, her expression softening. Then she looked back at Julian, her eyes hard as flint. "This bookshelf is not rustic," she said, her voice laced with contempt. "It's crafted. It was made by hand, with skill and care and attention to detail. It has more integrity in one of its mortise and tenon joints than you have in your entire body." It was a verbal vivisection. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Julian was momentarily speechless. His face, usually a mask of smug superiority, was a canvas of shock and outrage. "Now, hold on a minute, Chloe." "No, you hold on," she cut him off. "You waltz in here, you insult my home, you insult my guest, and you try to order me around as if I'm some accessory you could trot out to impress your vapid friends. It's over, Julian." "What's over?" he sputtered. "This," she said, gesturing between them. "This professional courtship. This song and dance. I don't want your contract if it comes with you attached. My studio will succeed or fail on the quality of my work, not on my willingness to be your arm candy." She walked to the door and opened it, a clear, unambiguous invitation to leave. "I think you should go now," she said. Julian stared at her, then at me. His eyes were narrowed, searching for a weak point, a way to regain control of the situation. He saw me, sitting on the floor by the pizza box, a silent observer. He thought he found his opening. "You're throwing away a multi-million-dollar opportunity for him?" he sneered, pointing a well-manicured finger in my direction. "For the handyman? Are you serious?" This was it, the moment of decision. I braced myself, ready for her to waver, to second-guess herself. The stakes were high. Chloe didn't even glance at me. Her focus was entirely on Julian. "He has a name," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "And his presence in my life has nothing to do with my decision to excise you from it. You did this all on your own. You're simply not the kind of person I want in my world." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Now get out." Julian, for the first time since I'd met him, looked truly defeated. He had no leverage left. He had played all his cards, and they were all worthless. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Fina, don't come crying to me when your little integrity project goes bankrupt." He stalked out, the heavy door slamming behind him, the sound echoing in the suddenly cavernous loft. The aftermath was a deafening silence. The air was thick with adrenaline and unspoken emotions. The half-eaten pizza sat between us, a forgotten casualty of the war. Chloe stood by the door for a long moment, her back to me. Her shoulders were shaking slightly. I wasn't sure if it was from anger or relief or something else entirely. Slowly, she turned around. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. The stakes of what had just happened, of what she had just done, were hanging in the air between us. She had chosen her integrity over her ambition. She had chosen a bookshelf over a contract. She had, in a way, chosen me, not as a partner, not as a lover, but as a symbol of the kind of world she wanted to live in. A world of substance over style, of craft over condescension. I got on my feet, my knees cracking in protest. I didn't know what to do, what to say. "Thank you" felt inadequate. "Are you okay?" felt patronizing. So I just stood there, a silent witness to her strength. She crossed the room and stood in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from her. She looked up at me, her gaze searching mine. "I think," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "that I'm going to have a very large glass of wine." "I can help with that," I said, my own voice hoarse. She gave me a watery smile. "I don't have any glasses unpacked yet. We can drink it out of the coffee mugs you remembered I offered." Her smile widened, reaching her eyes this time. "Deal." As she went to rummage through a box labeled "Kitchen, Fragile," I knew that something had irrevocably shifted. The mountain range between us hadn't disappeared, but a path had just been cleared. A dangerous, uncertain, thrilling path. And for the first time, I felt ready to walk it. My phone died. Of course it died. It was a Monday morning, the official start of a new week, and the universe had decided to throw a wrench into my perfectly oiled machine. I was on my way to a specialty lumberyard across town, the kind of place that didn't have a flashy website, but had boards of reclaimed chestnut that would make a grown man weep. The kind of place that was located in a labyrinthine industrial park that even veteran delivery drivers feared. And my GPS, my digital lifeline, was gone. The screen was a black, unhelpful void. I was parked on the side of a busy road, cars whizzing past, feeling a disproportionate sense of panic. My whole life was on that phone. My schedule, my contacts, my carefully curated podcasts about woodworking. Without it, I was just a man in a truck with a vague, nagging sense of being late. I did something I hadn't done in a decade. I tried to use my memory. I pictured the map I had glanced at that morning. Was it 2 rights after the bridge, or a right and then a left? The mental image was fuzzy, unreliable. Defeated, I drove back to the loft. Chloe was at her desk, sketching furiously in a large notepad, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up as I came in, her expression softening when she saw me. "Forget something?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. My brain, apparently, I grumbled. "And my phone's dead. I'm completely lost. I need to get to this lumber yard in the industrial boonies, and I'm flying blind." "A man of your considerable talents, felled by a dead battery," she teased gently. The irony. "It's a tragedy," I agreed, leaning against the doorframe. "Generations to come will tell tales of my hubris." She laughed, a bright, clear sound that did things to my insides. "Well, we can't have that. Here." She picked up her own phone from the desk and tossed it to me. I caught it reflexively. It was warm from her hand. "Just use my maps," she said, turning back to her sketch. "Don't get lost. I'm expecting a masterpiece in reclaimed chestnut." Her trust was so casual, so complete. It made my chest ache. I unlocked the phone. She told me the simple passcode days ago when we were trying to sync our calendars for the project, a gesture of practicality that felt like a secret whispered in the dark. Her background was a picture of a misty forest, green and quiet and deep. It looked like her eyes. I opened the map application. As it was loading the route, a notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. It was a text from a friend named Jess. "Jess, so how is Operation Don't Fall for Leo again going? Getting an ETA on that failure yet?" Winky face. My blood went cold. I stared at the screen, the words burning into my retinas. It was a joke, obviously, a bit of friendly banter, but it was a joke rooted in a truth I hadn't allowed myself to consider. A truth that was apparently so obvious, her friends had a name for it. My first instinct was to close the app, to pretend I hadn't seen it. It was a private conversation. I had no right. But the question it posed was a hook in my gut. Operation Don't Fall for Leo again. It implied a struggle. It implied a danger. It implied that falling for me was a mistake she had made before and was actively trying to avoid repeating. My thumb hovered over the screen. I felt like a trespasser, a peeping Tom of the soul. But I couldn't stop myself. My own self-preservation, my own need to understand the precarious ground I was standing on, took over. I closed the map and went to her contacts. My hands felt clumsy, my fingers thick and stupid. I typed my own name into the search bar. El Leo. And there it was. 2 entries. The first was Leo Maxwell, contractor. That was the new one, the professional one, the safe one. The second one was older. It was just Leo, and underneath it, in the company field where you might put a business name, she had written a note to herself. A warning label. "Do not fall for him again." The air left my lungs in a rush. It wasn't a joke between friends. It was a directive, a personal mantra, a piece of emotional armor she had forged for herself. And I had just stumbled into her armory and found it pointed directly at my heart. Everything that had happened in the past week replayed in my mind, but now it was cast in a new, harsh light. Her hesitation at the door, her careful questions, The way she'd watch me when she thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't curiosity. It was vigilance. She was watching a storm she knew was coming, waiting for it to break. I felt a wave of shame so profound it was dizzying. Shame for looking. Shame for what I'd found. And a deeper, older shame for being the kind of person who warranted such a warning in the first place. What had I done to her all those years ago that was so bad she needed a digital reminder not to let it happen again? I remembered our breakup. It hadn't been a big, dramatic fight. It had been a slow fade. I had just graduated. I had a job offer in a different city, a practical, sensible step on the ladder I was so eager to climb. She was still in school. I'd said all the right things. We'll make it work. It's only for a little while. I'll call every night. I hadn't. The calls became less frequent. The conversations became strained. The distance, which had started as a number of miles, became an emotional chasm. I had let my ambition, my practicality, my fear of a messy, uncertain long-distance relationship slowly and quietly strangle the best thing that had ever happened to me. I didn't cheat. I didn't yell. I just let go. I had ghosted her before ghosting was a term. I had let a great love die of neglect. And she had remembered. She had remembered so vividly that 12 years later, she needed a warning label. Find it. Her voice made me jump. I looked up from the phone, my face hot with guilt. She was looking at me, a curious tilt to her head. She couldn't see the screen from where she was. I had a choice. I could lie. I could say, "Yep, got the directions, thanks," and hand the phone back. I could walk out the door and pretend I'd never seen it. I could go back to my safe, quiet world of wood and screws and predictable outcomes. I could respect her privacy and, in doing so, leave that mountain range between us unexplored and unconquerable. Or I could do the thing I had failed to do 12 years ago. I could be direct. I could be honest. I could face the messy, uncomfortable truth head on. I took a deep breath. It felt like stepping off a cliff. "Chloe," I said, my voice unsteady. "We need to talk." The smile faded from her face. She saw the phone in my hand, saw the expression on my face, and she knew. I saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, followed quickly by a flash of panic, then a weary resignation. She put her pencil down, her movements slow and deliberate. You saw it, it wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. She let out a long, shaky breath and leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her hair. She looked tired. "I should have changed it," she murmured, more to herself than to me. I never thought you'd see it. Why is it there, Chloe?" I asked, the question raw and exposed. I walked over to her desk and carefully placed the phone down between us, screen up, the damning contact information glowing like an accusation. She stared at it for a long moment. "Because I have a terrible memory for pain," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine, "and a very, very good memory for hope." Her honesty was a punch to the gut. She wasn't angry. She wasn't embarrassed. She was just truthful. It was the most terrifying and disarming thing I had ever encountered. "When you showed up at my door," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "my first thought wasn't, 'Oh, there's a man who broke my heart.' My first thought was, 'Oh, there he is. He's back, like I'd just been waiting.' And that scared the hell out of me." She leaned forward, her gaze intense, pinning me in place. So I went back and looked at that contact, a thing I hadn't looked at in years. I put it there a long time ago, after a particularly bad date, on a night when I was feeling lonely and nostalgic and was tempted to look you up. It was a reminder, a warning to my future self. A warning against what? I whispered. "Against your quiet competence," she said, and the words that had been a source of pride for me were suddenly a weapon turned against me. "Against your steadiness, your decency, the way you make things seem so simple, so easy, the way you walk into a room and just fix things. I knew that if I let you, you would fix my shelves, and then you would fix my chaotic life, and you would fix my heart, and you'd do it all without ever saying a word. And then you would leave." Her voice broke on the last word. "You wouldn't mean to," she added quickly, as if defending me from herself. "You'd have a good, practical reason. A job, a plan, something sensible. And you'd pack up your tools and you'd go, and you would leave me in a beautiful, perfectly ordered world that was suddenly empty because you weren't in it. Because that's what you do, Leo. And that's what you did. Every word was a nail hammered into my coffin. She was right. She was so devastatingly, absolutely right. I had spent the last decade convincing myself that my practicality was a virtue, that my emotional caution was wisdom. But it wasn't. It was cowardice. I had built a fortress of solitude, not to keep others out, but to keep myself in, safe from the messy, unpredictable, terrifying business of loving someone. I sank into the chair opposite her desk, the pretense of being a capable, put-together man completely stripped away. I was just Leo, the man who warranted a warning label. "I'm so sorry, Chloe," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "I was an idiot, a kid. I was scared. We were both kids," she said gently. "But we're not anymore. And that was it, wasn't it? The heart of the matter. This wasn't about the past. It was about the present. It was about the two people sitting in this room right now with a decade of baggage and a fragile, terrifying spark of hope between them. "I'm not that kid anymore," I said, and I needed her to believe it. I needed to believe it myself. My marriage, it didn't end because I was boring. It ended because I was absent. I was there, but I wasn't present. I was so afraid of getting it wrong, of the mess, that I just checked out. I hid in my work. I hid in being dependable. I built a life that was perfectly safe and completely empty. I looked at her, and for the first time, I let her see it all. The regret, the loneliness, the profound, aching realization that I had been living a half-life. When I saw you at the door, I confessed, my voice raw. It was like the world switched back to color. It was terrifying, and I wanted to run back to my black and white world, to my blueprints and my levels and my predictable, lonely life. I leaned forward, my hands flat on her desk, needing to close the distance between us. "I don't want to run anymore, Chloe. I don't know what this is or where it's going. But I know that I haven't felt this alive, this scared, or this hopeful since the last time I was with you." I pointed to her phone, to the contact that had started this whole avalanche. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I can't promise I won't be clumsy or stupid or say the wrong thing. But I can promise you this. I will not be practical. I will not be sensible. And I will not, ever again, just quietly let you go." The silence in the room was absolute. Chloe stared at me, her green eyes wide and luminous, brimming with unshed tears. I had laid myself bare. I had no more walls, no more defenses. It was all there, my broken, hopeful heart, laid out on her drafting table. Slowly, she reached out and covered my hand with hers. Her touch was electric. "Leo," she whispered. And then, before she could say another word, she leaned across the desk, across the years of pain and misunderstanding, and she kissed me. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a kiss of confirmation, a kiss that said, finally. It was a kiss full of grief for the time we had lost and a fierce, desperate hope for the time we might still have. It tasted of coffee and regret and the sweet, terrifying promise of a new beginning. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. She rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Leo." I didn't need to ask what she meant. It was an answer. It was an acceptance. It was a leap of faith. I picked up her phone, my hand steady now. I navigated back to the contact. "Leo, do not fall for him again. Can we maybe update this?" I asked, my voice light with a relief so profound it felt like I could float. She took the phone from my hand. Her thumbs moved quickly over the screen. Then she handed it back to me. I looked down. She had deleted the warning. The contact now simply read, "Leo." It was a blank slate, a new beginning, a chance to get it right. I never made it to the lumber yard that day. I discovered there were more important things to build. Our first real date was a test. Not of our feelings, the kiss had pretty much settled that, but of our ability to exist as this new, fragile entity, us out in the real world. Away from the charged sanctuary of the loft, with its ghosts and its half-eaten pizza. Chloe chose the venue. a small, unassuming ramen shop tucked away in a neighborhood I barely knew existed. It was perfect. No expensive wine lists, no dress code, no pretense. Just a long wooden counter, the hiss of the kitchen, and the comforting smell of pork broth. I figured we've spent enough time in fancy, uncomfortable situations, she said, sliding onto a stool next to me. It's time for something real. I knew she wasn't just talking about the food. We ordered, and for a few minutes, we were just two people waiting for noodles, the silence comfortable. But I could feel the conversation we needed to have simmering between us, just as potent as the vats of broth in the kitchen. So, I started because someone had to. Operation Don't Fall for Leo again. Was there a mission briefing? Did I have a code name? I was trying for levity, but my voice was tight. She offered a small, sad smile. My friends are idiots, but they mean well. They were there for the aftermath the first time. The aftermath, I repeated. The word landed like a stone. I had thought of our breakup as a quiet fading, a mutual drifting apart. I had never considered that for her. It had an aftermath, like a natural disaster. What was it like? I asked, my voice low. For you, after I left. I needed to know. I needed to understand the hurt I had caused, not as an abstract concept, but as a real, lived experience. I owed her that at least. She looked down at her hands, resting on the wooden counter. It was quiet, she said. That was the worst part. You were my best friend, Leo. We talked about everything. And then, suddenly, there was just silence. At first, I made excuses for you. You were busy. You were stressed. Then the calls got shorter. You talk about your job, this new life you were building, and you never once asked me to be a part of it. She looked up, her eyes clear and direct, holding no accusation, only a deep, ancient sadness. I waited. I waited for you to say, I miss you. I waited for you to say this was a mistake. I waited for you to ask me to come, or for you to come back. And you never did. So one day, I just stopped waiting. I stopped answering the phone when you did call. Because every time we talked, it was like a little death. It was a reminder of what I was losing bit by bit. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I had been so wrapped up in my own fear and ambition that I had seen our drifting apart as a passive event, something that was just happening. I never considered that for her it was an active, painful process of letting go. I hadn't just left. I had forced her to watch me leave, inch by agonizing inch. I'm so sorry, Chloe. I whispered, the words utterly inadequate. I was a coward. You were a 22-year-old boy with his first real job and a terror of messing up, she corrected gently. I get that now. I didn't then. Then, it just felt like I wasn't worth the mess. Not worth the mess. The phrase echoed the core of my failure with Sarah, too. I had treated love like a construction project, something to be managed and kept tidy, with clean lines and no unforeseen complications. I had avoided the mess, and in doing so, I had avoided the entire point. Our ramen arrived, two steaming, fragrant bowls that seemed to command a moment of respectful silence. We ate, the slurping of noodles a temporary truce in our emotional excavation. My turn, I said after a few minutes, pushing my half-empty bowl aside. You deserve to know about my aftermath. I told her about Sarah. I told her how I'd met her just a year after I'd left, how she was everything I thought I wanted, stable, predictable, and completely unimpressed by my architectural dreams. I told her how I'd mistaken her lack of passion for a sense of peace. She called me safe. I said, the word tasting bitter. It was meant to be a compliment. We built a life that was like a model home. Perfect on the surface, beautifully staged, and completely devoid of life. There was no mess, no arguments, no pasión. We were just co-owners of a property. And one day, she woke up and realized she didn't want to live in a museum. She wanted a home. And by then, I finished, my voice quiet. I had forgotten how to build one. Chloe reached across the counter and laid her hand over mine. Her fingers were warm. So you started fixing other people's instead. It was easier, I admitted. I could control it. I could make it perfect. And at the end of the day, I could pack up my tools and leave. No miss. Until you walked into my mess, she said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Yeah, I said, my thumb stroking the back of her hand. Until I walked into your beautiful, glorious, terrifying mess. We sat like that for a long time, the clatter and steam of the ramen shop fading into a dull roar around us. We had done it. We had addressed the past. We had taken the ghosts and dragged them out into the light, and we had found that they were smaller, sadder, and far less powerful than we had feared. The next few weeks were a process of small, careful integrations. It was a dance of two people learning to share a space that was both a home and a job site, both a past and a future. It started with coffee. I started showing up a little earlier each morning, and there would be a mug waiting for me on the edge of a sawhorse, black with 2 sugars. It was a small, silent promise. I'm thinking of you. You belong here. Then it was the toothbrush. I had been working late, sanding the final pieces for a set of floating shelves for her bedroom. It was past midnight when I finished, and I was too exhausted to drive home. Just stay, she'd said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You can take the couch. I hadn't taken the couch. The next morning, I was rinsing my mouth out with tap water when she appeared in the bathroom doorway, holding a new toothbrush still in its packaging. For the next time you get sawdust in your teeth, she'd said with a sleepy smile. I left it in the ceramic holder next to hers. A small, plastic declaration of intent. A vote for next time. My life began to merge with hers in other, subtler ways. A copy of my favorite book appeared on her nightstand. I found myself humming the indie folk music she played while she worked. I learned that she hated the sound of chewing, but loved the smell of rain on hot pavement. She learned that I organized my screws by size and type, a quirk she found both endearing and slightly insane. One Saturday, I was installing a new faucet in her kitchen, a task that wasn't on the original work order. She was sitting at the newly built breakfast bar, sketching. You know, she said, not looking up from her paper, you don't have to keep fixing things. The job is technically done. I was underneath the sink, my voice echoing slightly. The old faucet was dripping. It was wasting water. And you can't abide waste, she said, a knowing smile in her voice. Or inefficiency, I grunted, giving a final, satisfying twist with the wrench. I slid out from under the sink and stood up, wiping my hands on a rag. There, I said. Perfect. She finally looked up from her sketch pad, her gaze soft. You've done so much, Leo. This place, it feels like a home now. It's a good space, I said, looking around. The bookshelf was full now, a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of her life and intellect. The new shelves are dotted with plants and strange, beautiful objects she'd collected. The light from the window fell on the warm wood floors. It wasn't just a loft anymore. It had a soul. Her soul. I have a proposition for you, she said, her voice suddenly serious. I braced myself. Okay, your lease is up next month, right? I was taken aback. How did you know that? You mentioned it last week. I listen, she said simply. And my landlord, who happens to be me, has noticed a very handsome, very skilled contractor who seems to have unofficially moved in any way. She got up and walked over to me, closing the space between us. My proposition is this. Stop driving across town. Move in. Officially. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. The moment where the blueprint meets the real world. The moment of commitment. The old me would have panicked. He would have talked about logistics, about the speed at which things were moving, about the need for a practical plan. The new me just looked into the moss-green eyes of the woman who had single-handedly dismantled his entire defensive structure and rebuilt him from the ground up. Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I'm messy. I leave sawdust everywhere. I have a truly alarming number of clamps. I know, she said, her hands coming up to cup my face. And I have a truly alarming number of books. I think our alarming things will get along just fine. Chloe, I started, needing to make her understand. It's not just about sharing a space for me. If I move in, I'm not leaving. Not unless you throw me out. I know that too, she said, her gaze unwavering. That's the point, you idiot. She pulled my head down and kissed me, a kiss that was less about passion and more about sealing a contract, a silent, binding agreement, a foundation for the future. Later that night, as we lay in her bed, the city lights twinkling outside the massive window, she turned to me. I deleted the other contact. By the way, she said into the quiet darkness. The contractor won? I asked, my arm tightening around her. Yeah, she said. Seemed redundant. I smiled into her hair. It smelled like vanilla and sawdust. It smelled like home. 2 years later, the loft was a different place. It was no longer just Chloe's space that I happened to occupy. It was ours. My drafting table, a beautiful old oak piece I'd restored, sat opposite her desk, creating a shared zone of creative chaos. Our books commingled on the shelves I'd built. My worn-out paperback thrillers nestled against her weighty architectural tomes. The line between his and hers had blurred into a comfortable, easy ours. My business was thriving, but it had changed. Inspired by Chloe, I had started taking on smaller, more meaningful projects. I worked with a nonprofit that built accessible playgrounds. I helped the community center convert their basement into a workshop for kids. I was still fixing things, but now it felt like I was building something bigger. Chloe's design studio had taken off, landing a landmark project to redesign a neglected downtown plaza. She had done it on her own terms, with her integrity intact. Julian was a footnote, a half-remembered anecdote we told at dinner parties that ended with the punchline, and she told him his soul had less integrity than a mortise and tenon joint. Our life was a symphony of comfortable routines and small, happy surprises. We had Sunday morning coffee in bed. We had Wednesday night takeout and argued about what to watch. We had fights about who left the wet towel on the floor, and we had slow, quiet reconciliations that always ended in laughter. It was messy. It was complicated. It was real. One crisp autumn evening, we were driving back from a weekend upstate. We'd gone apple picking, a cliché I would have once scoffed at, but which now felt like a vital, necessary ritual. The back of my truck was filled with absurdly large bags of apples, and the cab was filled with the warm, comfortable silence of two people who no longer needed to fill every moment with words. I was driving. Chloe was navigating, her phone resting on the center console, the map glowing in the twilight. A new notification lit up her screen, a message from her friend Jess. Jess, ETA on my godchildren? Getting impatient over here. Chloe laughed and typed back a quick reply. I smiled. Operation Don't Fall for Leo Again had officially been downgraded and repurposed. I glanced over at her phone. Her background was no longer the misty forest. It was a picture I had taken of her a few weeks ago on a windy day at the beach. Her hair was a wild mess. She had a huge, uninhibited smile on her face, and her eyes were sparkling with life. She was beautiful. On a whim, I reached over and picked up the phone. Hey, she protested with a laugh. I'm navigating. I know the way from here, I said. I just want to check something. My heart gave a familiar, playful flutter as I opened her contacts and typed in my name. There it was. One entry. The name simply said, Home. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled me washed over. It was a single word, but it contained everything. The long years apart, the chance reunion, the fear, the hope, the forgiveness. The rebuilding of a broken thing into something stronger and more beautiful than it had been before. I looked over at her. She was watching me, a soft, knowing smile on her face. She knew what I would find. It was the only thing that fit, she said softly. I put the phone back on the console and took her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. Her hand felt small and warm in mine. It felt right. I had spent so many years of my life thinking I knew what home was. I thought it was a place with 4 walls and a roof. I thought it was a set of blueprints, a solid foundation, a project completed to perfection. I had been wrong. Home wasn't a place. It wasn't a building. It was her. It had always been her. I brought her hand to my lips and kissed her knuckles, my eyes on the road ahead, the road that was finally leading us in the same direction. Me too, I said, my voice thick. Me too. She squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement that we had made it. We were no longer two separate people with a shared, painful past. We were a single, unified future. We were home, and we were just getting started. What would you have done if you found a note like that on a loved one's phone? Would you have confronted them, Or would you have pretended you never saw it and try to forget? It's a tough spot to be in, caught between respecting their privacy and needing to understand your own story. Tell me your story in the comments. Have you ever had a second chance with someone from your past, and did it work out? I'm always fascinated by the tangled, messy, beautiful ways our lives connect and reconnect. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in next.